The dust hadn't settled on her father's grave when Sally Patters locked the door and threw Abby's bedroll sailing past her head into the Texas dirt. Abby was her stepdaughter, 16 years old, a dead father, no kin, no claim, just a dog, a tired horse, and the unforgiving prairie stretching toward a horizon that promised nothing. Then Bluey, the dog, started digging at the cursed Anderson ranch, and something happened.
Hello, compliments of the season. If you love heartwarming stories about life in times past, then you'd enjoy these stories. Comment where you're watching from, like and share these videos with loved ones as you enjoy them. Do not forget to subscribe to our channel too. My team and I have something free and beautiful for you once we hit the 1,000 subscriber mark. It will be shared in the community. You know, we go to great lengths to make these videos, and your support means a lot to us. Therefore, we plan to give back to you once we are able to, so be a part of what we are building.
After the Civil War ended in 1865, newly freed African Americans faced both opportunity and violent backlash during the period called Reconstruction. Many freed families worked tirelessly to build new lives, opening businesses, buying land, and saving money through institutions like the Freedmen's Savings Bank, established in 1865. However, this era was also marked by extreme violence and theft. Groups of former Confederate soldiers and white supremacist organizations deliberately targeted black communities, stealing their savings, destroying their property, and using terror to prevent their economic progress. Between 1865 and 1877, countless freed families had their hard-earned money stolen in raids that were rarely prosecuted. The Freedmen's Savings Bank itself collapsed in 1874, wiping out the savings of over 61,000 depositors, most of whom lost everything with no compensation. This, combined with organized theft and violence, destroyed the economic foundation many freed families had worked years to build. Today's story takes place in 1875 Texas, during the final years of Reconstruction, when such injustices were tragically common. What makes Abby's story powerful is that she chose to right a historical wrong, returning stolen wealth to its rightful owner's descendants, something that rarely happened in real history. Her choice represents the justice that thousands of families deserved but never received.
The sun was setting over Abilene, Texas, turning the sky the color of a fresh bruise when 16-year-old Abby Robertson found herself standing in the yard of the only home she had ever known, her father's worn saddle slung over one shoulder and Bluey's rope lead wrapped around her other hand. The blue heeler mix pressed against her leg, ears flat, sensing trouble the way cattle dogs always did. Behind her, the door slammed shut. Sally Patters stood in the window, her face hard as the drought-cracked earth, blocking out what little light remained. "You got no right to this place, girl," Sally had said, her voice cold as a January wind. "Your daddy's gone, and I ain't feeding another mouth, especially not some half-grown thing that eats like a field hand." Abby didn't answer. She had learned that arguing with Sally only made things worse. Sally had never liked her. Not since the day 3 years ago when Abby's father married her, thinking a woman's presence might soften the rough edges of frontier life. But Sally wasn't soft. She was sharp, calculating, and now that cholera had taken him, she saw Abby as nothing more than a burden, a mouth to feed, a problem she didn't sign up for. Abby's clothes lay scattered in the dust. Her mother's old Bible landed face down in the dirt beside the water trough. Her spare boots hit the fence post and tumbled into the weeds. Sally didn't bother to look. She just pulled the curtains shut, and Abby heard the bolt slide home with a sound like a coffin closing. The neighbors watched. Mrs. Coleman peeked through her kitchen window. Old Mr. Briggs paused his evening chores, but no one came outside. No one asked if a girl and her dog needed help. In a town like Abilene, people minded their business, especially when it came to family matters, even ugly ones. Abby swallowed hard, her chest tight with shame and disbelief. She wasn't crying yet. She was just numb, hollow, like something inside her had been scooped out and thrown away. Bluey let out a low whine, licking her dusty hand. The dog had been with her since she was 12, ever since her father brought him home from a cattle drive, saying every cowgirl needs a partner. Bluey had been through everything with her. Long nights watching over sick calves, cold mornings mending fence, whispered fears that her father's cough was getting worse. He was more than a dog. He was family, the only family she had left. "We'll be okay, boy," Abby whispered, even though she wasn't sure it was true. Her aging mare, Copper, stood tied to the post, ribs showing through her dappled coat. The horse had maybe one good ride left in her. Maybe. Abby gathered what she could carry, her hands shaking but steady enough. She lifted herself into the saddle, Bluey trotting close beside, as they turned away from the only home she had ever known and rode toward the edge of town. Every step felt heavier than the last. Abby didn't know where they were going, only that they couldn't stay here. The sunset painted the prairie in shades of orange and red as a young cowgirl and her loyal dog disappeared into the vast Texas wilderness, carrying nothing but each other and a fragile hope that somewhere out there, a better life was waiting.
The prairie stretched out endlessly in every direction, flat and unforgiving under a sky so wide it made Abby feel smaller than she ever had. The first night, she and Bluey slept under the stars, wrapped in her father's old bedroll while Copper grazed on whatever scrub grass she could find. The ground was hard and cold, but it was better than begging Sally for mercy that would never come. By the second day, Copper was limping badly, her left foreleg favoring every step. Abby knew horses well enough to recognize the signs. The mare was wearing down fast. Too many hard years, too little feed, and now this unexpected journey was pushing her past her limits. "Easy, girl," Abby murmured, stroking Copper's neck. "We just need to make it a little further." The landscape began to change as they moved closer to the Brazos River country. The land rolled gently here, dotted with mesquite trees and rocky outcrops. Abby had heard stories in town about this area, whispered conversations between adults who thought she wasn't listening. They talked about the Anderson Ranch, a place that had been abandoned for nearly 8 years. Cursed, some said, haunted by the ghosts of men who did terrible things during the war. Nobody wanted it, nobody went near it. But to a girl with nowhere else to go, a cursed ranch sounded better than sleeping on the open prairie. By the third day, Abby spotted it in the distance, a dark cluster of buildings tucked into a shallow valley, protected on 3 sides by limestone ridges. As they got closer, the details came into focus. The main house sagged in the middle, its porch roof collapsed on one end. The barn was mostly rubble now, just a few standing beams and a pile of rotted wood. Fences lay broken and overgrown with prairie grass and thorny mesquite. It looked like the earth itself was trying to swallow the place whole, to forget it had ever existed. But the structure was still there, barely standing, but standing. Abby felt a strange flutter in her chest, not quite hope, but something close to it. "This could work," she said to Bluey, who sniffed the air cautiously, his tail low but not tucked. They approached slowly, Copper stumbling twice before they reached the yard. Abby dismounted and led the mare to what remained of a stock tank. Miraculously, it still held a little rainwater. Copper drank deeply, her sides heaving. Inside the main house, the air was thick with dust and the smell of old wood, but the roof over the back room was intact enough to keep out the weather. Abby swept aside debris and spread her bedroll on the floor. Bluey explored every corner, sniffing and marking his territory, his tail lifting slightly as if approving their new shelter. "It's not much," Abby said, trying to convince herself as much as the dog, "but it's ours for now." Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. Copper lay down in the yard, too exhausted to stand. Abby's heart broke a little seeing her, but there was nothing to be done tonight. She curled up on her bedroll, Bluey pressed against her side, and for the first time since Sally threw her out, Abby felt something other than fear. She felt like maybe, just maybe, they could survive this. Morning light slipped through the broken windows, thin and pale, but warm enough to wake Abby from a restless sleep. For a moment she forgot where she was. Then she saw the cracked ceiling, the dust dancing in the sunbeams, and Bluey's empty spot on the bedroll. Reality came back fast, but it didn't feel as terrifying as the night before. At least they had shelter. She sat up, rubbing her eyes, and listened. Bluey was barking outside, not his warning bark, but something urgent, excited, almost frantic. Abby grabbed her boots and rushed out into the yard. What she saw made her stop cold. Bluey was digging near the old barn foundation, his front paws working furiously, throwing dirt and rocks behind him in wild sprays. His nose was pressed to the ground, his whole body vibrating with purpose. "Bluey, stop!" Abby called out. "You're going to hurt yourself on a rusty nail or something." But the dog ignored her completely. He just kept digging, deeper, faster, like he'd caught the scent of something he couldn't let go. Abby walked over, intending to pull him away, but as she got closer, she noticed something strange. The ground where he was digging sounded different, hollow. She knelt down and brushed away some of the loose dirt Bluey had exposed, what looked like old, weathered boards beneath the soil. Her heart started to beat faster, not quite with fear, but with something she couldn't quite name. Curiosity, maybe, or the feeling that something important was about to happen. She cleared more dirt away, revealing a wooden frame. The boards were rotted in places, but still solid enough to hold shape. It looked like a covering for something underneath. Using a rock, Abby pried at the edges. The wood groaned and cracked, but finally gave way. Beneath it, stone steps led down into darkness. A root cellar, she realized. People built them to store food, to keep things cool in the brutal Texas summers. But why would someone board it up so carefully? Bluey barked once, sharp and proud, as if to say, "I found it, I did this." Abby's hands trembled as she peered into the darkness. The air that drifted up smelled dry and strangely clean, not like the damp rot she expected. She remembered seeing an old oil lamp in the house. She fetched it, along with matches her father had left in his saddlebag. The lamp sputtered to life, casting weak yellow light as she descended the steps carefully, testing each one before putting her full weight down. Bluey followed close, his body pressed against her leg. At the bottom, Abby raised the lamp and her breath caught in her throat. The cellar was small but intact, and along the far wall sat 3 wooden crates stacked neatly. Beside them, wrapped in oilcloth, was what looked like a leather journal. Everything was covered in a fine layer of dust, untouched for years. Bluey wagged his tail and barked again. Abby's heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. This wasn't just an old root cellar. This was something hidden, something someone wanted kept secret, and nothing would ever be the same again. If this story of courage and integrity has touched your heart, subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories about doing what's right when the world isn't watching.
Abby set the lamp down on the dirt floor, her hands shaking as she approached the first crate. The wood was old but solid, held together with iron bands that had rusted at the edges. She knelt beside it and carefully pried open the lid. It groaned in protest but finally gave way. What she saw inside made her gasp. Gold coins, hundreds of them, gleaming dully in the lamplight, even through years of dust. Confederate currency mostly, but also Union double eagles and silver dollars. More money than Abby had ever seen in her entire life, more money than she could even comprehend. Her first thought was simple and desperate. This could save me. I could buy land, cattle, a future. Nobody could ever throw me out again. But something held her back from touching the coins. Something about the way they were packed, so carefully, so deliberately, like someone had been hiding them, not saving them. Bluey whined softly, his ears flicking back and forth. Abby moved to the second crate. This one held jewelry, pocket watches engraved with initials, rings both simple and ornate, lockets containing tiny photographs of people she didn't recognize, women in plain dresses, men in work clothes, children with serious faces staring at the camera. These weren't the belongings of wealthy plantation owners. These looked like the treasures of ordinary working people. The third crate made everything clear. Inside were stacks of documents, yellowed with age, but still legible, lists of names, amounts, locations, all written in careful script. At the top of the first page, someone had written, Marshall, Texas, April 1867, Freedmen's Savings. The names that followed were clearly those of freed black families, the Washingtons, the Carters, the Jacobs family, dozens more. Beside each name was an amount taken. Abby's stomach turned as she read further. There were also letters, receipts, proof that these families had worked and saved and earned this money legally, only to have it stolen from them. Then she found the journal wrapped in oilcloth and tied with leather cord. She opened it carefully. The first page was dated June 1867 and signed Captain J. Anderson. "I am dying," the first entry read, "and I must confess what I have done so that God might have mercy on my soul, though I deserve none." Abby read on, her horror growing with each page. Anderson and his men, former Confederate soldiers bitter about the war's outcome, had raided freedmen's settlements during the violent chaos of Reconstruction. They'd terrorized families, beaten men, stolen everything these people had managed to save. Anderson had justified it at first, told himself these people had no right to property, no right to prosperity. But as years passed and fever took hold of him, guilt consumed him. He'd hidden the evidence in this cellar, meaning to return it, but he died before he could confess where it was. His family abandoned the ranch soon after, unable to live with what he'd done, unable to face the ghosts of his crimes. Abby sat back against the cold stone wall, her mind reeling. She was holding a fortune stolen from people who had already lost everything, people who'd fought for freedom, only to have it ripped away again. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, clear as if he were standing right beside her. "A Robertson's word is worth more than gold, Abby girl. Lose your honor, you lose everything that matters." Bluey rested his head on her knee, his dark eyes watching her trustingly, waiting for her to decide what kind of person she was going to be. Abby didn't leave the cellar for hours. She sat there in the flickering lamplight, reading Anderson's journal over and over, trying to understand how a man could do such terrible things and then just hide the evidence as if that made it better. The names haunted her. Sarah Washington, who'd saved for 3 years to buy her children's shoes. Thomas Carter, who'd worked double shifts at a lumber mill to save enough to buy his own tools. The Jacobs family, who'd pooled their money to purchase a small plot of land. These weren't just names on a page. These were real people who'd suffered, and she was holding what remained of their dreams. That first night, back in the main house, Abby couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw 2 different futures. In one, she took the gold, sold it quietly to someone who wouldn't ask questions, bought herself a small ranch far from Abilene, built a life where she'd never be cold or hungry or thrown out again. She could have cattle, horses, maybe even hire hands to help work the land. She'd be independent, secure, free. In the other future, she saw the faces from those locket photographs, the woman with kind eyes, the serious children, the working men who'd earned every penny only to have it stolen by men like Anderson. She saw herself riding to Fort Worth, finding the law, doing what her father would have done, even if it meant staying poor, even if it meant she got nothing. Bluey watched her from across the room, his head resting on his paws, his eyes never leaving her face. The second day, Abby opened one of the lockets and stared at the photograph inside. A young black woman held a baby on her hip, both of them dressed in their Sunday best. The woman's expression was proud, dignified, full of hope for a future that had been ripped away. Abby's hands trembled as she closed the locket. Who was she? Who did that baby become? Did they survive? Did they ever know what happened to their family's savings? Her father had taught her to rope, to ride, to read the stars and survive on the frontier. But more than any of that, he taught her about character. "I've known rich men who were poor in spirit," he told her once, "and poor men who were richer than kings because they kept their word. Honor ain't about what you got, Abby. It's about who you are when nobody's watching, when it would be easier to do wrong than right." By the third night, Abby had made her decision. Her stomach was empty. She had maybe 2 days of food left. Copper had died that morning, and Abby had buried her behind the barn with tears streaming down her face. She had nothing, no money, no horse, no family, just Bluey and a clear conscience. She wrapped 1 gold coin in her kerchief as proof of what she'd found. Then she walked back down into the cellar and closed the crates. She'd come back with the law, with witnesses, with people who could help find the families these coins belonged to. It was the harder choice, the honest choice, and it was the only choice her father's daughter could make. Tomorrow, she'd start the long walk to Fort Worth. Tonight, she'd sleep knowing she'd chosen right over easy.
The walk to Fort Worth took Abby 2 full days. Her boots wore blisters on her heels, and the Texas sun beat down merciless and unforgiving. But Bluey stayed close, and she kept moving, one foot in front of the other, carrying nothing but her father's canteen, the wrapped gold coin, and a few pages torn from Anderson's journal as proof. When she finally reached the sheriff's office on a dusty Thursday afternoon, she must have looked half wild, sunburned, limping, covered in trail dust. Sheriff Wade Hutchins glanced up from his desk and frowned. "Can I help you, miss?" "I need to report a discovery," Abby said, her voice hoarse from thirst. "I found something at the old Anderson ranch, something that was stolen." Hutchins leaned back in his chair, skeptical. "The Anderson place? That's been abandoned near a decade. What exactly did you find?" Abby unwrapped the gold coin and set it on his desk, along with the journal pages. "Confederate gold," she said, "and Union currency, too. Jewelry, documents. It all belonged to freed families that got robbed during Reconstruction. I found Captain Anderson's confession. He wrote down everything." The sheriff's expression shifted from doubt to sharp attention. He picked up the coin, examined it, then read the journal pages. His jaw tightened. "You're telling me there's a cache of stolen property out there, and you just walked 2 days to report it instead of keeping it?" "Yes, sir," Abby said, "because it's not mine. It belongs to the people it was taken from, or their families if they're still alive." Hutchins studied her for a long moment, then called for his deputies. Within an hour, a group of 5 men rode out with Abby back toward the ranch. She rode behind Deputy Frank Garrett on his horse, her legs aching, Bluey loping alongside. When they reached the cellar and Hutchins saw the crates for himself, his face went grim. "This is real," he said quietly. "This is evidence of a crime, maybe the biggest theft case I've seen in years." He turned to Abby. "You did the right thing coming to me, Miss Robertson. Not many folks would have." The next weeks moved fast. Hutchins brought in a federal marshal named Clayton Torres, who specialized in Reconstruction-era crimes. They documented everything, photographed the crates, cataloged each item, contacted historians and government officials in Austin. Newspapers picked up the story. "Girl finds stolen fortune, returns it to seek justice," the headlines read. Reporters came asking questions. Abby told them the same thing every time. It wasn't mine to keep. Meanwhile, Hutchins offered Abby a place to stay with his family. His wife Emma was kind, feeding Abby proper meals, mending her worn clothes, treating her like she mattered. Their 2 young sons followed Bluey around the yard, fascinated by the loyal cattle dog who'd helped make the discovery. The hardest part was waiting to see if any descendants of the robbed families could be found, waiting to learn if her choice to do right would lead to anything more than just being poor and honest. But Abby slept soundly every night, knowing she'd honored her father's memory, and that was worth more than all the gold in Texas. If Abby's courage to choose integrity over wealth has inspired you, don't forget to subscribe for more true stories of people who did what's right when no one was watching.
2 months passed while investigators worked to track down descendants of the families listed in Anderson's documents. Abby settled into a routine at the Hutchins home, helping Emma with cooking and mending, playing with the boys, teaching them how to whistle for Bluey. The dog had gained weight and his coat shined, healthier than it had in months. Abby herself looked different too. Her cheeks had filled out, her clothes were clean, and her eyes had lost that haunted, hollow look she'd carried the day Sally threw her out. Then, one afternoon in late October, a rented buggy rolled up to the Hutchins property. Abby was hanging laundry when she heard the wheels crunching on the gravel drive. She turned, and her stomach dropped. Sally Patter stepped down from the buggy, dressed in a nice brown traveling dress, her hair pinned up neat, her face painted with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Abby, honey," Sally called out, walking toward her with open arms. "I've been looking everywhere for you." Abby stood perfectly still, clothespins in her hand. Bluey trotted over and positioned himself between them, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "What do you want, Sally?" Abby said, her voice flat. "Now is that any way to greet family?" Sally's smile twitched but held. I know I was harsh before. I was grieving, your father. Wasn't thinking straight. But I've had time to reflect, and I realize I was wrong. You should come home. We can work things out. Abby stared at her, really looked at her. Sally's eyes kept darting to the house, to the yard, calculating, assessing. The newspapers had run stories about the discovery, about Abby's finder's fee that would likely be awarded by the state. Word had spread across 3 counties. Sally hadn't come out of love or regret. She'd come because suddenly Abby was worth something. You didn't want me when I had nothing, Abby said quietly. You threw my things in the dirt and locked the door. You told me I had no right to my own father's home. Sally's expression flickered, annoyance breaking through the sweetness. That was different. You were being difficult. Sally took a step forward. Bluey's growl deepened, his hackles raising. You only want me now because you heard about the reward, Abby continued, her voice growing stronger. You don't care about me. You never did. You just see another meal ticket, another way to get something you didn't earn. That's not fair, Sally snapped, her mask slipping. I took care of you for 3 years. 3 years! Abby felt something hard and sure settle in her chest. You took care of me, she repeated, or you tolerated me while my father was alive. The moment he was gone, you couldn't wait to be rid of me. And now that there might be money, you show up calling me family? Family doesn't throw each other out into the dirt. Emma Hutchins appeared on the porch, her arms crossed, her face stern. I think you should leave, Mrs. Patters. Sally looked between them, her face flushing red with anger and humiliation. Fine, she spat, climbing back into the buggy, but don't come crying to me when that reward money runs out. The buggy pulled away, kicking up dust. Abby watched it go and felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a quiet certainty that she'd outgrown the girl who'd once been afraid of Sally Patters. Bluey pressed against her leg, and she scratched behind his ears. We're okay, boy, she whispered, and for the first time, she truly believed it.
3 weeks later, on a crisp November morning, Abby stood in the Fort Worth courthouse wearing a simple blue dress Emma Hutchins had made for her. Bluey waited outside with Sheriff Hutchins, tied to a post in the shade, his tail wagging whenever someone walked past. The courtroom was packed with people, reporters, government officials, lawyers, and 3 families who'd traveled from different parts of Texas to be there. The Washingtons had come from Fort Worth itself. An elderly woman named Ida Washington, her son Benjamin, and his 2 teenage daughters sat in the front row, dressed in their finest clothes. Ida's hands trembled as she clutched a worn Bible. The Carters had traveled from Dallas. Thomas Carter, a blacksmith in his 40s with strong, weathered hands, sat beside his wife Ruth and their young son. They kept glancing at the documents on the table as if afraid they might disappear. The Jacobs family had made the journey from Waco. Samuel and Mary Jacobs, both in their 60s, their daughter Grace sitting between them, holding both their hands. All 3 had tears in their eyes before the proceedings even began. Judge Harrison Caldwell called the room to order and explained what was about to happen. Through the diligent work of Sheriff Hutchins, Marshal Torres, and various historical societies, we have verified the identities of descendants from families robbed during the violent Reconstruction period of 1867. The items recovered will be returned to these families along with a formal acknowledgment from the state of Texas of the injustice done to their ancestors. He paused, looking directly at Abby. None of this would have been possible without the extraordinary integrity of Miss Abby Robertson, who discovered this cash and immediately reported it, rather than keep it for herself. The room erupted in applause. Abby felt her face flush hot. She wasn't used to being noticed, wasn't comfortable with praise. She'd just done what her father taught her. One by one, the families approached the table to receive what had been stolen from their ancestors. Ida Washington was first. Her son helped her stand and walk forward. When the marshal handed her a ledger showing what had been recovered and a bank draft for the returned funds, Ida's legs nearly gave out. She reached for Abby, pulling her into a fierce embrace. "Child,
Ida whispered, her voice breaking. "You gave us back more than money. You gave us back our ancestors' dignity. You proved that someone cared about what happened to us, that we mattered." Abby hugged her back, tears streaming on her own face. Thomas Carter shook her hand, his grip firm and grateful. "My great-grandfather, Thomas Sr., worked himself nearly to death saving that money," he said. "They beat him when they took it, told him he had no right to keep what he earned. Thank you for proving them wrong." The Jacobs family presented Abby with a handmade quilt pieced together in a star pattern. "This is for you," Grace said, "so you'll always remember that doing right matters, that you made a difference." Then Judge Caldwell addressed Abby directly. "The state of Texas awards you an official finder's fee in the amount of $1,500. It's not the full value of what you found, but it represents our gratitude for your honesty." Abby accepted the bank draft with shaking hands. It was more money than she'd ever imagined having, enough to build something real, something lasting. As she left the courthouse that day, Bluey jumping up to greet her, she felt something she hadn't felt in months. Peace.
6 months later, the Anderson Ranch looked nothing like the broken, cursed place Abby had stumbled upon that desperate night in the rain. The main house had a new roof, sturdy and tight against the weather. The porch had been rebuilt with fresh cedar planks, and the windows now had real glass that caught the morning sunlight. 3 small cabins stood where the old barn had collapsed, each one simple but solid, with wood stoves and proper beds. A vegetable garden stretched out behind the main house, already showing the first green shoots of spring, and a new corral held 4 horses, including a young buckskin mare Abby had named Clover. Abby stood on the porch, watching as a wagon approached down the newly cleared road. Beside her, Bluey sat alert, his tail wagging slowly. The dog had grown sleek and confident, his coat glossy, his eyes bright. He still patrolled the property every morning and evening, as if guarding something precious. The wagon carried a widow named Catherine Hayes and her 2 young children fleeing an abusive situation in San Antonio. Sheriff Hutchins had sent word a week ago asking if Abby had room. She did. She always would. "Miss Robertson," Catherine said, climbing down carefully, her daughter and son clinging to her skirts, "I don't know how to thank you." "Just call me Abby," she said, helping unload their few belongings, "and you don't need to thank me. We all need help sometimes. I know I did." The main house now served as a common area where residents could cook together, share meals, and find company in the evenings. The cabins provided privacy and safety, a place where women and children cast out by circumstance, cruelty, or bad fortune could catch their breath and figure out their next steps. Abby called it Second Chance Station, and already word was spreading across Texas. 2 other women lived there now. Rachel, a young woman escaping a violent husband, and Margaret, an older widow who'd lost everything in a fire. They helped each other, mended fences together, planted seeds together, taught the children to read and cipher at night. Abby still slept with her father's saddle hanging on the wall and Anderson's journal locked in a trunk. She'd kept it as a reminder that choices mattered, that one person's integrity could echo forward, changing lives beyond their own. Bluey slept at the foot of her bed, gentle with the children but protective of everyone under their roof. As the sun set that evening, painting the Texas sky in shades of gold and crimson, Abby sat on the porch steps, watching the children play in the yard. Catherine and Rachel were preparing dinner, their laughter drifting through the open windows. Margaret was teaching young Timothy Hayes how to whistle for Bluey. This was what the money had bought, not just land or buildings, but purpose, community, a place where the most vulnerable could find shelter, where no one would ever be thrown out into the cold alone. Bluey trotted over and rested his head on Abby's knee. She scratched behind her ears and thought about that terrified girl who'd ridden away from Abilene with nothing but a dying horse and a loyal dog. She'd been so scared, so certain the world had nothing left to offer her. But she'd been wrong. Doing the right thing hadn't made life easier, but it had shown her who she really was. And in the end, that was worth more than all the Confederate gold in Texas. So here's a question for you. If you were in Abby's place, desperate, alone, and suddenly facing a choice between survival and integrity, what would you choose?
Abby chose honor, and that choice gave her something no amount of money ever could: a legacy of compassion, a home built on doing right, and the knowledge that she'd made the world just a little bit better. If this story of courage and choosing what's right over what's easy has moved you, subscribe to the channel for more powerful tales about ordinary people who did extraordinary things when no one was watching.
If you enjoyed this latest story on life in the old Wild West, then I'm sure you will love the next one coming up. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel so you can get updates on time. Did I tell you we post new, exciting, heartwarming stories daily? Subscribe now to join us so you won't miss any new stories.